My wife leaned into my best friend's ear and whispered that I could never satisfy her, loud enough for half the room to hear. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't defend myself. I simply turned, walked out of that backyard, and let her enjoy the attention she was so desperate to get, because I had already decided exactly how this would end. That single moment changed everything. One sentence meant to bruise my pride became the spark that showed me who she truly was. People around us laughed awkwardly, unsure whether to pretend they hadn't heard or join in on the joke she was trying to force. Connor, the man she whispered it to, stood frozen, torn between shock and embarrassment. But me? I felt a strange calm settle over my chest, the kind you get when clarity finally replaces confusion. Most people expect chaos after a public insult. They expect yelling, accusations, maybe even a scene that becomes neighborhood gossip for weeks. Instead, I gave her nothing. No reaction. No argument. No hint of what I knew was coming. Because humiliation hits hard, but silence hits harder. What she didn't know was that the moment she tried to belittle me, she handed me every reason I needed to expose what she'd been hiding. By the time she realized I wasn't coming back to that cookout, the first part of my plan was already in motion. Stay with this story, because this quiet man's response didn't just shift the power, it turned her entire world upside down. Landon Pierce wasn't the kind of man who drew attention when he walked into a room. At 36, he'd built a life that ran on quiet routines, early mornings, steady work in IT compliance, and evenings spent unwinding in a small home on the east side of Columbus, Ohio. He liked order. Predictability. The world made more sense when things stayed in their place, and he did everything he could to keep his life steady. His closest friend, Connor Reddick, had been around since college. Connor was louder, more outgoing, the type who filled silence without thinking about it. Their personalities balanced each other. Where Connor pushed, Landon steadied. Where Landon hesitated, Connor reassured. They weren't brothers by blood, but anyone watching them would assume they were. Marissa, Landon's wife, was different from both of them. She was vibrant, social, the kind of woman who lit up a room with confidence alone. When they first met, her energy was what drew him in. She made their life feel fuller, and for a long time, he believed their differences complemented each other. He admired how she handled people with ease, how she could turn a gathering into something memorable. It made him feel proud to stand beside her. But over the past year, something about her began to change. The confidence that once felt warm began to feel sharp. Her jokes about his quiet nature grew bolder, especially around friends. She brushed off his concerns with a smile, saying he was too sensitive or overthinking again. It wasn't constant, but it was steady enough to leave a mark. He noticed her comfort around Connor deepening. Nothing dramatic, just small moments that lingered long enough to unsettle him. A hand on Connor's shoulder that stayed a bit too long. A laugh that felt exaggerated. A glance exchanged between them during group conversations that left him wondering whether he was imagining things. Whenever he raised it gently, she called him insecure. Connor dismissed it as harmless. Landon tried to believe them. Most evenings were still normal. Marissa cooking something quick while humming to a playlist she liked. Landon sitting at the kitchen table, reviewing work notes. They looked like any average couple from the outside. Friendly. Stable. Functional. But beneath that surface, tension was beginning to form, thin at first, almost invisible. He could feel something changing but didn't know how to name it. She started making little comments that stung. Remarks about how he wasn't adventurous, or how she wished he'd learn to loosen up. He didn't argue, he just took them in quietly. That had always been his way, observe first, speak later, if at all. Still, he couldn't shake the sense that she was testing how far she could push. Looking back, he realized those moments were early warning signs. Tiny cracks forming in a marriage he had tried to protect. He didn't know it yet, but those cracks were about to split open in the most public way possible, and his life would never return to the quiet stability he treasured. Before everything fell apart, Landon's life looked simple from a distance, almost ordinary, but the kind of ordinary many people quietly wish for. He grew up without much stability, raised in a small apartment by a single mother who juggled 2 jobs. That upbringing shaped him. He learned early that calm was valuable, steadiness was a blessing, and loyalty was something a person earned day by day. When he became an adult, he built his world around those principles. He didn't chase excitement, he chased peace. And for a long stretch of his life, he believed he had finally found it. His friendship with Connor was one of the most meaningful parts of that world. They met in college during a group project neither of them wanted to do. Connor had a loud laugh, bold opinions, and a way of filling silence with stories that always sounded slightly exaggerated. Landon was the opposite, quiet, thoughtful, careful with his words. But somehow they fit together. Connor pulled Landon out of his shell, and Landon grounded Connor during moments when his impulsiveness got the better of him. They grew together through first jobs, stressful moves, and breakups that felt world-ending at the time. Over the years, Connor became more than a friend. He was the brother Landon never had, the person he trusted without second thought. Then came Marissa. She worked at a local marketing agency and had a presence that turned heads. She was warm, full of energy, and curious about things Landon thought no one noticed. Their first conversations were easy. She asked about his work, his hobbies, even the small things, like why he preferred walking over driving when he needed to clear his mind. She laughed at his deadpan jokes and told him she liked the way he observed people. For someone who rarely felt seen, that attention meant a lot. Their early relationship was soft. She brought color into his quiet life, and he brought steadiness into hers. When she struggled with a demanding supervisor, he stayed up with her through long nights, helping her sort through presentations and rehearse pitches. When she doubted herself, he reminded her of the times she had succeeded before. He believed in her, even when she didn't believe in herself. Their home life grew into something easy. Saturday mornings spent cooking breakfast together. Evenings curled up on opposite ends of the couch watching their favorite shows. Slow walks around Schiller Park when the weather cooperated. None of it was flashy, but it felt safe. Comfortable. Predictable in the best way. Landon took pride in that stability. He worked hard to maintain it. But small changes began slipping in, slow enough that he ignored them at first. Marissa started texting late into the night. She said work was busy, her team needed her input, and deadlines kept shifting. He didn't question it. She had always given her all to her job. But the glow of her phone became more frequent. Sometimes she'd tilt the screen away when he walked into the room. Other times she'd lock it quickly, flashing a smile as if nothing was wrong. Then there was her laughter around Connor. She had always gotten along with him, but lately her reactions seemed exaggerated, laughing too hard at jokes that weren't particularly funny, brushing his arm as she walked past, leaning a little too close when they talked. Landon noticed, but he told himself not to read too much into it. Connor would never cross a line, he thought. And Marissa? She knew how much Connor meant to him. Still, the moments added up. Her comments also began to shift. When she was stressed, she took small jabs at his calm nature. "You never get excited about anything," she'd say, or, "Sometimes I wonder if you feel things the same way other people do." She said them casually, usually followed by a smile or a quick kiss, but the words stuck. He didn't respond because he didn't want to make problems bigger. He assumed it was temporary stress. The biggest warning came from their neighbor, Mrs. Daly, who ran into him while he was checking the mail. She mentioned seeing Marissa out for lunch with a man she didn't recognize. Tall, sharp-looking, seemed younger. She said it lightly as if making small talk. Landon laughed it off and said she probably met a coworker, but the comment stayed with him longer than he expected. Still, he didn't question Marissa. He had spent years believing that loyalty should be met with loyalty, and trust should be given unless proven otherwise. So he kept doing what he did best, supporting her through every rough patch, encouraging her through changes at work, and maintaining the peaceful life he valued so deeply. Looking back, the signs weren't heavy or dramatic. They were small shifts in tone, behavior, and attention. Little pieces that didn't mean much on their own but hinted at something he wasn't ready to see. At the time, he told himself marriages went through phases, friendships evolved, and stress could rearrange priorities. He convinced himself he was imagining things, that love simply had seasons. He never realized those small things were the early tremors before the ground finally split beneath him. Because when the truth revealed itself, it didn't come quietly. It landed in front of friends, neighbors, and one person he trusted like family, leaving no doubt that the stability he had worked so hard to build was already slipping out of his hands. The day everything shifted began like any other neighborhood gathering. Nothing fancy, just a cookout in the Reddick's backyard on a warm Saturday afternoon. The kind where kids ran between lawn chairs, music played low from a portable speaker, and the smell of grilled food floated across the fence lines. Landon arrived with Marissa, carrying a bowl of salad she'd prepared that morning. He greeted a few neighbors, found a comfortable spot near the shade, and settled into the easy rhythm of small talk. Connor moved around as the informal host, laughing loudly, hyping up the burgers, and introducing people who hadn't met yet. He eventually made his way to Landon's side, clapping him on the shoulder and asking how work had been lately. The usual stuff. Steady. Predictable. Marissa joined them a few minutes later with a drink in hand. She slipped between the two men with her usual confidence, brushing lightly against Connor as she leaned in to say something. Her voice was low at first, too quiet for the surrounding group to catch, but close enough for Landon to notice the subtle shift in Connor's expression. His smile faltered. His eyes flickered downward, then back toward the ground. Something about his posture changed, and even though Landon didn't know the words yet, he recognized discomfort immediately. Before he could ask what she'd said, Marissa straightened up with a casual shrug and repeated herself loud enough for the people around them to hear. "Landon can't keep up with me. Not even close." The words floated out with a hint of humor, as if she wanted it to sound playful. But the sting was sharp, and it hit with precision. Conversations around them slowed. A couple of guests let out small, awkward laughs, the kind people make when they're unsure whether something is a joke or an insult. Someone coughed. Another looked away, pretending to focus on the grill. Connor didn't laugh. He stood there frozen, jaw tight, eyes flicking between both of them. He opened his mouth as if to say something, then closed it again. The color drained slightly from his face, and he shifted his weight, unable to hide how uncomfortable he was. For Landon, the moment landed like a blow he never saw coming. His chest tightened. His breath caught halfway. It felt as though the entire backyard had tilted. He didn't cry, didn't lash out, didn't make a scene. But inside, something in him paused, like a machine that suddenly seized after running smoothly for years. The air changed too. People didn't look at him directly, but he could feel their glances. A soft wave of secondhand embarrassment washed through the crowd. It wasn't loud or dramatic, it was subtle, but not subtle enough to miss. There's a certain hush that follows a public insult, an unspoken understanding that a line has been crossed, even when no one says it outright. Marissa took a slow sip of her drink, pretending she'd said nothing more than a harmless tease. She didn't look at Landon. She didn't check for his reaction. She simply enjoyed the attention she created, small as it was. Landon stood perfectly still. Outside, he maintained the same calm posture he always had. Inside, a cold heaviness settled deep, spreading through his chest and down into his stomach. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was something quieter. A recognition. A shift. A moment he knew he could never pretend didn't happen. Connor finally murmured, "Marissa, come on," but his voice trailed off quickly. He didn't know how to repair what had just been torn. Landon knew, in that instant, that something fundamental had changed, not just in their marriage, but in him. A place he once considered safe had exposed him, and the woman he trusted had chosen humiliation over respect. The guests resumed their conversations slowly, trying to brush off the discomfort. But the damage had already been done. And as Landon looked at the people around him, he realized they weren't looking at Marissa. They were watching him, waiting to see how a quiet man handled a wound delivered in public. He gave them nothing. Not a word. Not a question. Not a show. He simply breathed once, deeply, and felt a door inside himself close. Landon didn't argue. He didn't ask Marissa what she meant or try to correct the impression she'd created. He stood there for a few seconds, letting the silence wrap around him. Anyone watching would have thought he was simply embarrassed, maybe stunned into stillness. But inside, A storm gathered in a way he had never felt before. Not loud. Not explosive. Just a tightening clarity, like a lens clicking into focus. He gave Connor a small nod, barely a gesture, then told Marissa he left his phone inside the house. His voice sounded steady, almost gentle, as if the comment she'd made hadn't scraped something deep inside him. She barely glanced at him, waving him off as though he were interrupting a conversation. Connor tried to say something, but the words stalled. His guilt showed in the way he didn't meet Landon's eyes. Landon walked through the sliding door into the Reddicks' living room. The noise of the party softened behind him, muted by the glass. In the quiet, he pulled out his actual phone, not left behind at all, and opened the feed from his home security system. He selected the backyard microphone and hit record. The device picked up distant chatter and laughter. He adjusted the sensitivity until familiar voices were clearer. Then he slipped the phone into his pocket and stood still. His pulse hammered at first. The humiliation replayed in sharp detail, her tone, her timing, the subtle smirk she thought he didn't catch. But as he listened to the muffled sounds outside, something inside him cooled. The situation had crossed a line he never believed she would cross, not publicly and certainly not with Connor in the middle. And instead of being crushed, he felt a strange steadiness form. Almost like acceptance. He walked out of the house quietly, avoiding the main crowd. A couple of neighbors standing near the driveway nodded to him as he passed, unsure whether to mention what they'd heard. He nodded back politely, keeping his expression neutral. Marissa didn't notice he was gone until several minutes later. From the backyard, she scanned the crowd, expecting him to return with his phone. When she didn't see him, she frowned, shrugged, and kept talking. To anyone watching, she looked mildly inconvenienced. Underneath that, she assumed he'd slipped away because he was embarrassed, too ashamed to face the group after her joke. Connor, on the other hand, noticed immediately. He stepped away from the group and looked toward the house, searching for Landon's silhouette. He didn't see him. That absence hit him harder than he expected. He knew his friend. Knew his temperament. Knew the quiet was never a good sign. He tried calling Landon once. It rang twice, then went to voicemail. Out by the street, Landon unlocked his car with the same calm he had used walking away from the backyard. He didn't sit and process the moment. He didn't cry. He didn't rehearse arguments or imagine confrontations. His mind didn't scatter the way it normally did under stress. It sharpened. He started the engine and pulled away from the curb. No screeching tires, no dramatic exit. Just a smooth departure from a gathering that had shifted the ground beneath his feet. Marissa continued socializing, unaware that her husband had left the cookout, unaware that the exact words she'd whispered and repeated were being captured clearly on a recording. She assumed he'd come back eventually, after cooling off or swallowing the embarrassment. But Landon's calm wasn't embarrassment. It was something else entirely, something she had never seen in him and didn't yet know to fear. Landon didn't rush home after leaving the cookout. He drove around Columbus for nearly an hour, letting the roads take him wherever they curved. By the time he pulled into his driveway, the numbness inside him had settled into something steady. Not anger, just a quiet certainty that he needed answers. He walked inside, placed his keys on the entry table, and headed straight for the small office he'd set up months earlier. He wasn't looking for confrontation. He wanted clarity. Something concrete. Marissa kept her laptop password simple. She changed it once a year, always using a combination of her birth month and a nickname she'd used since high school. He typed it in, half expecting to be wrong. The device unlocked instantly. His hands didn't shake. His breath stayed even. But his chest tightened the moment he saw a message thread pinned to the top of her inbox, Trevor Hollis. The name meant nothing to him at first. A few clicks later, it meant too much. Trevor worked at the firm she'd joined earlier that year, someone she'd described as smart but inexperienced. The conversation threads told a different story. Late-night chats stretched across entire weeks. Messages filled with inside jokes. Complaints about work that were followed by lines that drifted from friendly into personal. He didn't scroll wildly. He took his time. There were photos of hotel bars. A few comments that hinted at meetings outside office hours. Nothing explicit at first, But deeper in the thread, the tone changed. There were references to catching up during lunch breaks, mentions of being careful, and then, unmistakably, a message from Trevor. Last night was worth every risk. Another followed hours later. Same place next week? That was the moment the numbness spread through him fully. He didn't slam the laptop shut. He didn't breathe harder. He simply stared at the screen and let the truth settle. It didn't shock him the way the cookout whisper had. That moment had already cracked something inside him. These messages just confirmed what his instincts had quietly suspected. He forwarded the emails to a secure folder in his own cloud drive, closed the laptop, and sat back in his chair. The house around him was quiet, the kind of quiet he usually appreciated. Tonight it felt different, more like a silence waiting for a decision. For the first time in their marriage, he knew he wasn't imagining things. Something real had changed, and now he had proof. Connor didn't sleep much that night. He called Landon twice, texted several times, and debated driving to his house before deciding against it. By early morning, he showed up unannounced anyway, knocking gently as if the slightest noise might shatter something fragile. Landon opened the door wearing the same clothes from yesterday. His expression was calm, almost too calm, and that unsettled Connor more than any outburst could have. "Can we talk?" Connor asked. Landon stepped aside, motioning him in without a word. They sat in the living room, sunlight cutting through the blinds. Connor leaned forward with his elbows on his knees, struggling to start. "I should have stepped in. I should have said something sooner." His voice cracked slightly. What she said wasn't just a joke. Landon listened quietly. Connor took a breath. Before she repeated it out loud, she said something else. Something worse. Landon didn't respond, but the question hung in his eyes. Connor swallowed. "She said she's never been attracted to men like you. That you're safe but not exciting, and that she finally understood what she'd been missing." The words hit differently from the messages he'd read earlier. This wasn't from a stranger. This came from someone who knew Landon deeply, someone who had watched him build a life from scratch. Landon nodded once, slowly, as if filing the information away inside a growing archive of truths. "I didn't know what to say," Connor added. "I froze. But it wasn't right. None of it was right." Landon didn't lash out. Didn't accuse him of enabling her behavior. Instead, he asked a quiet question. "Has she said things like that before?" Connor hesitated. That hesitation was already the answer. "Not exactly like that," he admitted. "But lately she's been acting different. More bold." More. He stopped himself. The word he almost used didn't matter. Landon leaned back into the couch, eyes focused on a spot on the wall. "Thank you for telling me," he said. Connor looked confused. "That's it? For now?" The response wasn't cold. It wasn't dismissive. It was controlled. Calm in a way that felt heavier than anger. And that frightened Connor more than if Landon had blown up. He left the house knowing something irreversible had begun. Landon wasn't devastated. He wasn't rattled. He was calculating. Later that afternoon, Landon went through the bank statements he usually skimmed without much thought. The charges were mostly ordinary: groceries, gas, subscription services, small purchases here and there. Then he saw a transaction from a hotel downtown. A place neither he nor Marissa had ever visited together. At first, he thought it might be a mistake. But then another charge appeared from the same location 3 weeks earlier, followed by one more 2 months before that. 3 separate visits, all billed to his personal credit line. He clicked on each receipt, studying dates and times. They lined up suspiciously well with nights when Marissa claimed she was catching up on projects or staying late to help her team meet deadlines. He printed the receipts and placed them neatly on the desk beside the email messages. The evidence no longer looked like coincidence or misunderstanding. It formed a pattern, one that pointed toward deliberate deceit. His hands still didn't shake. His breathing didn't stutter. If anything, he felt steadier than he had in months. There was no dramatic moment of everything collapsing. Instead, a cold clarity settled over him. He spent years giving Marissa grace, assuming stress or work was the root of their tension. But these receipts told a different story. The woman who once leaned on him during her hardest days was now using his resources to support meetings she didn't want him to know about. He sat there for a long moment, staring at the printed papers. Instead of feeling destroyed, he felt something else rising, a quiet resolve. A certainty that the version of himself she thought she could belittle wasn't the one she was dealing with anymore. The more he uncovered, the calmer he became. It wasn't numbness now. It was preparation. He gathered the receipts, scanned them, backed them up in a separate drive, and locked the physical copies in a small fireproof box in his closet. A precaution, nothing more. When he stepped out of the office, the house felt different. Not because of the discoveries, but because he finally understood the situation without excuses. She wasn't confused. She wasn't overwhelmed. She was choosing someone else. And paying for the opportunity with his credit line. The clarity wasn't comforting, but it was stabilizing. He wasn't lost anymore. He knew exactly what had to come next. By the time Marissa came home that evening, Landon had already organized the evidence, reviewed the messages twice, and mapped out the early steps of a plan he hadn't shared with anyone, not even Connor. She walked through the door humming, carrying a to-go cup from her favorite coffee shop. Her smile was bright, unfazed, as though nothing unusual had happened at the cookout. She gave him a quick kiss on the cheek and said something about the long day she'd had. Her tone was light, almost playful. If she sensed anything off, she hid it well. Landon watched her move through the kitchen, unpacking leftovers and talking about a colleague who'd annoyed her during a meeting. She spoke with ease, unaware that her phone, sitting on the counter, still carried messages from the man she'd been seeing behind his back. He responded to her comments with short, neutral answers. Nothing cold, nothing irritated. Just steady. The very steadiness she once appreciated and lately mocked. She never mentioned the whisper at the cookout. Never apologized. Never checked whether he was hurt. That omission told him everything. She assumed he was embarrassed and trying to forget it. She assumed his quiet meant weakness, retreat, avoidance. She believed the version of him she'd built in her mind, predictable, harmless, easy to dismiss. He studied her carefully as she talked. The casual way she grabbed her phone when it buzzed. The small smile she tried to hide when reading a message. The way she angled the screen away from him. None of it was new, but tonight it carried a different weight. He wasn't angry watching her. He was observing. The contrast between her actions and the truth he now held made her seem almost unfamiliar. This wasn't the woman who cried on his shoulder when work overwhelmed her. This wasn't the woman who once bragged about how lucky she was to have someone steady in her life. This version of her looked like someone wearing a mask so carefully crafted she'd forgotten it was even on. As she moved around the house talking about her week, Landon listened quietly, storing each detail, each gesture, each omission. By the time she went to shower, he had no remaining doubts. She thought he was the same man she had humiliated earlier that day, the one who walked away without a word. But the man sitting at the table wasn't retreating. He was preparing. Her calm evening routine only confirmed what he already knew. She believed she was safe. And that false sense of safety was the final piece he needed before making his next move. Landon didn't sleep much that night, but it wasn't the restless kind of sleeplessness that comes from pain. His mind was clear, organized, steady. He lay awake in the dim light of his home office, reviewing everything he had uncovered, messages, receipts, shifts in Marissa's behavior, Connor's confession. By sunrise, he knew with absolute certainty that the marriage could not continue. There was no repairing what she had broken. And more importantly, there was no desire left in him to try. He didn't mourn that realization. He accepted it. What mattered now was closing this chapter in a way that protected his dignity and ensured she couldn't twist the story to suit her comfort. He'd seen people do that, rewrite their own betrayal into victimhood. Marissa had the personality for it. She knew how to turn a crowd. So before making a single outward move, he began structuring a plan anchored in facts, timelines, and documentation, not emotion. He opened a new folder on his computer and labeled it Personal Records. Inside, he created subfolders: messages, financials, recorded audio, statements. One by one, he placed each piece of evidence inside, naming them with dates and brief descriptions. Not out of spite, out of necessity. If she tried to paint him as unstable or vindictive, he needed to be able to stand on solid ground. Next, he wrote out a timeline on a notepad. Not digital. Handwritten. He didn't want any chance of her seeing it on a shared device. The timeline stretched back months. Key dates from hotel charges, screenshots of messages, moments he remembered Marissa coming home later than usual, and even the neighbor's casual mention of the lunch outing. Seeing it all laid out in order made the pattern undeniable. But the turning point came when he contacted someone he'd never met before. Kayla, Trevor Hollis's girlfriend. He found her through Trevor's social media, photos, tags, mentions. It wasn't hard. Trevor was careless with visibility, the same carelessness that made him sloppy enough to leave traces in his messages with Marissa. Landon sent a simple, respectful message. Hi Kayla. I believe we need to talk about something involving both of us. Nothing dramatic. Just truth. Please let me know when you're available. She responded within an hour, asking if he was referring to the behavior she had suspected for weeks. That reply alone told him she was ready for answers. They met at a small cafe on the north side of town, both sitting with quiet restraint. Kayla arrived with a folder of her own, screenshots of conversations between Trevor and someone saved under a different name, which she now believed was Marissa. When Kayla saw the evidence Landon had collected, she didn't react loudly. She let out a long breath, nodded slowly, and said, "Thank you for confirming what I already knew." For the first time since the cookout, Landon felt the tension in his chest ease. Not joy, not relief, just validation. After the meeting, he took the next steps methodically. He contacted his bank to freeze joint accounts temporarily, citing unauthorized charges. He scheduled a consultation with a family law attorney who explained what documents he needed and how to ensure service was handled cleanly. They agreed on a date for Marissa to receive the divorce papers, timed precisely for when he knew she would be surrounded by people unable to create a false narrative without risking contradiction. The attorney warned him. She may say you're acting irrationally. She may try to claim emotional distress. She may shift blame in any direction she can. Landon nodded, already aware of the risks. There was another risk too, Connor. His involvement was unavoidable. If Marissa sensed her world collapsing, she might try to pull him in, twist the story, accuse Landon of jealousy or paranoia. Connor could be caught between them, unsure whose version to believe. Landon planned for that as well. Facts first. Emotion later. By the time he returned home that afternoon, the plan was no longer a loose idea. It was a framework with dates, actions, and contingencies. Every step designed to expose truth without tantrums, without theatrics, without giving her a single opportunity to flip the narrative. The man she thought she humiliated into silence was nowhere to be found. This version of Landon was calm, deliberate, and fully aware of his own worth. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he wasn't reacting to Marissa's choices. He was making his own. The new house on Sycamore Ridge was buzzing long before Landon arrived. It belonged to a couple Marissa knew from her marketing firm, people who loved hosting, people who lived for well-decorated rooms and curated gatherings. Their housewarming party had been planned for weeks, and Marissa insisted they attend. She told Landon it would look strange if they didn't show up. She wanted people to see them together. She wanted the image of a happy marriage to stay intact. Landon agreed without hesitation. His signature calm disarmed her completely. She assumed things had blown over. She assumed he was done sulking about the cookout. She assumed the man she embarrassed in front of neighbors was back in his assigned place. Quiet, predictable, easy to overlook. But everything she believed about him was wrong. He walked into the house slightly behind her, carrying a modest bottle of wine as a courtesy gift. The entryway was filled with chatter, soft music, and the smell of catered appetizers. Their hosts greeted them warmly. Marissa slid instantly into social mode, laughing loudly, hugging people she barely knew, complimenting outfits. She thrived in spaces like this, where attention flowed freely. Landon stayed by her side briefly, then drifted toward the living room. He spotted Connor standing with a drink, shoulders tense. Their eyes met. Connor nodded once, An acknowledgement, not an invitation. He was anxious, waiting for something he didn't fully understand. On the opposite side of the room, Trevor Hollis arrived with Kayla. Trevor looked relaxed, confident even. Kayla looked composed but distant, her expression unreadable. She had already agreed to let Landon lead. She had no intention of causing a scene, she just wanted truth, the same way he did. At the center of the gathering, an HR representative from Marissa's company chatted with colleagues near the charcuterie table. Marissa hadn't noticed yet. She was too busy entertaining a small circle of friends, her voice animated as she recounted stories from work. Landon waited. He didn't rush. He didn't approach her immediately. He gave the party time to settle, gave conversations time to build, gave Marissa time to feel comfortable. He wanted the reality to land without force. Truth has more weight when delivered with stillness. Finally, he stepped forward. "Marissa," he called softly. She turned with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "What's up? You okay? Can we gather everyone in the living room for a moment?" His voice was steady, almost gentle. No anger. No tension. Confusion flickered across the faces around her. She gave an awkward laugh. "But what's going on? It'll only take a minute." Something in his tone made Connor straighten. Kayla set her drink down quietly. Trevor's smile faltered for the first time. The hosts, unsure but polite, asked everyone to step into the living room. The crowd shifted, filling the chairs, the couch, the edge of the wall. Marissa stood near the doorway, arms lightly folded, masking her irritation. "Landon," she whispered sharply under her breath, "you're being weird. What are you doing?" He didn't respond to her privately. Instead, he spoke clearly so everyone could hear. "I want to share something that happened recently. I think it's important." Her face stiffened. "Landon, stop. This isn't the place." "It is," he replied calmly. He pulled out his phone. A few guests exchanged confused glances. Trevor shifted uncomfortably. Connor swallowed hard. Landon tapped the recording. Marissa's voice filled the living room speakers. Sharp, smug, unmistakably hers. "Landon can't keep up with me. Not even close." It played exactly as it had been spoken at the cookout, clear enough to silence the entire room. The laughter, the murmurs, the awkward pauses, it was all there. A few people gasped softly. Someone whispered, "Wow." Marissa's face drained of color. "Landon, what are you doing? Why would you play that here?" "I thought you said it as a joke," he said calmly. "So I assumed you wouldn't mind hearing it again." Her mouth opened but no words came out. Before she could gather herself, Landon continued. "That comment wasn't the only thing I learned that day." Kayla stepped forward, her expression composed but resolute. She held a folder and a printed stack of screenshots. "These belong to both of you," Kayla said, looking directly at Marissa and Trevor. Trevor's face tightened. "Kayla, though." She cut him off gently. "Please don't embarrass yourself further." Kayla handed the stack to the nearest person, who passed it along as the room fell even quieter. Messages between Marissa and Trevor, timestamps, photos, suggestive comments, all of it, circulated from hand to hand. Every pair of eyes reading those pages widened with disbelief. Marissa's breathing grew uneven. "This is taken out of context," she said quickly. "These messages are old. They don't mean anything there." "They're from last week," Kayla said plainly. Trevor stepped forward as if to intervene. "Everyone needs to calm down. This isn't something that should be handled here." The HR representative cleared her throat. "Actually, this concerns workplace conduct. I'm going to need to review these." Trevor froze. Completely. The room shifted with unspoken judgment, soft murmurs, side glances, the weight of truth pressing down on every corner. The confidence Marissa carried into the party evaporated. She looked around desperately, searching for someone to defend her. No one did. Even Connor, usually her biggest supporter, couldn't lift his head. Shame clouded his features. He had been used as a prop for her cruelty, and now he stood in the middle of the fallout, unable to undo it. Landon let the silence linger a moment before reaching into his coat pocket. "I have one more thing." He handed Marissa a sealed envelope. Thick, formal, prepared by his attorney. She stared at it for several seconds as if hoping it wasn't what she thought. But when she opened it and saw the header, her knees nearly buckled. Divorce? Her voice cracked. Len, please, not like this. Not in front of... He held her gaze evenly. You made your choices in front of others. I'm only returning the truth in the same way. She shook her head frantically, tears collecting at the corners of her eyes. I can explain. I swear I can explain everything. You're overreacting. We can fix this. We can go home and talk. No, he said softly. We can't. Trevor tried to step in again. Man, let's. Landon didn't even look at him. This doesn't concern you anymore. HR will take it from here. The HR rep nodded stiffly. We will be addressing this first thing Monday. The final blow came from the crowd itself. No one stepped toward Marissa. No one offered her comfort. Her mask had cracked too publicly. Too completely. As she cried silently, clutching the envelope, Landon stepped back. His face wasn't hard. It wasn't triumphant. It was peaceful, an expression she hadn't seen in a long time. He turned toward the door, addressing the room with a quiet, composed voice. I'm leaving now. Thank you for listening. No raised voice. No insults. No chaos. Just the clean, undeniable weight of truth. Marissa reached out a hand as if to stop him, but she didn't move fast enough. Trevor stood rigid, sweat forming at his temples. Connor stared at the floor, shoulders slumped under the heaviness of guilt. Landon walked out of the house with the same calm he had shown the night she whispered to Connor. But this time, the calm wasn't a reaction. It was victory. The moment Landon stepped out of the house, the atmosphere inside shifted from stunned silence to frantic whispers. The recording had already done its work, but the screenshots cemented everything in place. There was no story Marissa could spin, no half-truth she could hide behind. The crowd had seen enough. Marissa stood frozen in the living room doorway, still holding the divorce envelope with trembling hands. Her earlier confidence was gone, replaced by a rising panic she couldn't disguise. People she once charmed couldn't meet her eyes. The ones who had laughed with her at previous gatherings stepped back, unsure whether to comfort her or stay far away from the fallout. The social ground she relied on suddenly felt slippery. One of the hosts, trying to manage the tension, walked gently to her side. Let me take you outside for a bit, he said softly. It wasn't an offer, it was a quiet way of asking her to leave without making things worse. She nodded numbly, and he guided her through the crowd. Every step looked heavier than the last. Her breath came in uneven bursts, her mascara smudging at the corners of her eyes. She wasn't escorted out harshly. She was escorted out the way someone is led away from the center of a storm, because staying would only make the damage deeper. Meanwhile, on the far side of the room, the HR representative pulled Trevor aside. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't scold. Her expression alone delivered the message. We'll discuss this privately, she said. But this cannot wait. Trevor tried to defend himself. This is being blown out of proportion. We didn't, none of this. Her hand lifted slightly. Stop. We'll handle this properly on Monday. For now, leave the event. His face drained. Whatever smooth confidence he carried earlier had evaporated. As he left the room, Kayla didn't follow. She didn't speak to him. She didn't even glance in his direction. She simply folded her arms and let him walk out alone. Connor, who had kept to the corner the entire time, finally stepped forward. His expression carried shame that weighed more heavily than anger ever could. He approached the nearest group of guests and said, loud enough for the room to hear, I should have stopped it when it happened. I didn't. That's on me. It wasn't a speech. It wasn't self-punishment. It was acknowledgement, a rare kind, the kind people respected even when the situation was ugly. Someone placed a hand on Connor's shoulder. Another nodded quietly. They didn't blame him. He hadn't caused the betrayal, but they understood why he felt responsible for not shutting it down sooner. Outside, Landon walked slowly toward his car. He didn't rush. He didn't slam the door. He sat behind the wheel and let out a long, steady breath. The relief wasn't triumphant. It was the kind that comes after months of silent confusion finally make sense. He felt drained, the kind of exhaustion that sinks deep into the bones, but beneath it was something lighter. A release. For the first time in a long time, the weight wasn't on him. Inside the house, Marissa stood on the sidewalk with the host beside her. She wiped a tear from her cheek, her hands shaking as she stared at the divorce papers. Reality settled in layers. First shock, then regret, then the realization that the man she dismissed so easily had taken control in a way she never anticipated. She whispered, maybe to herself more than anyone else, "I didn't think he'd do this." That was the truth. She never saw him as someone capable of decisive action. She assumed his quiet meant passiveness. She assumed his patience meant compliance. She assumed he would tolerate humiliation the way he tolerated stress. But he hadn't been quiet out of weakness. He had been quiet because he was done. And that shift was too vast for her to grasp in a single evening. As Landon drove away, he didn't look back at the house or the people gathered inside. He didn't replay the confrontation in his mind. He didn't try to justify his actions or second-guess the timing. He felt empty in one sense, emotionally spent, yet freed in another. The power she once held over him evaporated the moment truth reached the surface. And now, for the first time, the consequences rested entirely on her. Landon moved into a short-term loft downtown the week after the housewarming party. It wasn't large, just a clean space with tall windows, exposed beams, and a small balcony overlooking part of the Columbus skyline. It wasn't home, not yet, but it carried something he hadn't felt in a long time, quiet without tension. He unpacked only what he needed, clothes, his laptop, a few books, and left the rest in storage until he figured out the next phase of his life. The first few mornings in the loft felt strange. He woke up expecting to hear Marissa moving around the kitchen or humming to herself in the bathroom. When the silence greeted him instead, he didn't feel loss. He felt clarity. He realized how long he'd been adjusting himself to accommodate a relationship that was slowly draining him. He returned to work 2 days after the party. Word hadn't spread, but the HR rep from Marissa's company had already reached out to him privately, thanking him for cooperating with their inquiry. He kept his responses professional, straightforward, and brief. His own job continued normally, though a supervisor approached him quietly and mentioned a potential transfer to a different team, one that offered more flexibility and fewer late-night compliance emergencies. Landon didn't commit yet, but he considered it. A fresh start didn't sound so bad. He also started reconnecting with people he had drifted from over the years, old college acquaintances, co-workers he used to grab coffee with, even his younger cousin who lived nearby. Small conversations. Simple lunches. Just enough human connection to remind him that his world was larger than the marriage that ended. Connor reached out several times. The first call went to voicemail. The second, Landon answered. Connor apologized again, this time more quietly, without rehearsed words. "I should have stepped in earlier," he admitted. "I didn't realize how far things had gone." Landon accepted the apology. Not because everything felt fine, but because holding on to anger didn't serve him. Connor hadn't created the betrayal, he had simply been too close to see the warning signs. Landon told him he needed space, at least for now, and Connor respected that without protest. As for Marissa, she sent a long message the day after she received the divorce papers. It was a mix of regret, denial, and desperate attempts to soften what happened. She didn't take responsibility, not fully, but she tried to frame everything as a rough patch they could still recover from. Landon read the message once, then placed his phone face down on the kitchen counter. He didn't reply. He didn't block her either, not out of hope, but out of calm detachment. He no longer felt compelled to respond to every emotion she pushed his way. Her voice no longer carried the power it once had. Days turned into a quiet rhythm. He cooked simple meals. He took evening walks around the city. He allowed himself to rest, genuinely rest, without feeling judged or belittled. And little by little, the heaviness in his chest loosened. One evening, after finishing up some work emails, he opened the drawer of his nightstand. Inside, placed exactly where he left it, was his wedding ring. He held it for a moment, not with sadness or longing, but with acknowledgement. It represented a chapter he tried to honor, even when the other person didn't. A chapter he was finally ready to close. He set the ring inside a small wooden box, slid the drawer shut, and walked toward the balcony. The city stretched beneath him, lights flickering across office buildings, the soft hum of traffic rising from the streets, a faint breeze moving through the open space. Standing there, he felt neither triumphant nor broken. Just steady, present. He wasn't thinking about revenge anymore. He wasn't replaying the humiliation at the cookout or the confrontation at the housewarming party. He wasn't imagining what Marissa might say next or how Trevor would deal with HR. He was thinking about tomorrow. And the day after that. About peace that didn't depend on anyone else's choices. He leaned forward on the balcony railing, breathing in the cool evening air. This wasn't the life he expected, but it was the beginning of a life he chose. Quiet, steady. This is where our story comes to an end. If you stayed with me through every moment, thank you. Your time here means more than you know. Share your thoughts in the comments section. I genuinely love to hear what you think about Landon's choices, the truth coming to light, and the final direction his life took. Thank you for being part of this community, for showing up, and for supporting these stories each time they appear in your feed. If you enjoy stories like this and want to hear more, please subscribe to the channel.